I already scheduled the demolition. Monday morning, 8 a.m. My sister said it the way she announced everything, not as information, but as a verdict. She was looking at her phone when she said it, scrolling through something that was apparently more interesting than the conversation happening around her. The estate attorney cleared his throat. Miss Hargrove, the rural parcel transfers to your sister today. The structures on it are hers to manage as she sees fit. My sister finally looked up, not at me, at the attorney. The barn is a liability. I had it assessed last spring. The foundation is compromised. There's asbestos flagged in the inspection report, and it's been sitting empty for 11 years. It's not an asset. It's a lawsuit waiting to happen. She tucked her phone into her Chanel bag and reached for her coffee. I'm doing everyone a favor, including her. I sat across the conference table and looked at my hands. My parents had been gone for 6 weeks. My father first, then my mother 14 days later. Like she simply could not be bothered to stay without him. And now I was sitting in a leather chair in a downtown Nashville law office, watching my sister accept the house, the savings accounts, the investment portfolio, and the car my mother had driven to church every Sunday while I was handed a manila folder containing the deed to a 40-acre rural parcel and a condemned barn that was apparently already booked for destruction. I had 3 days to get anything out of it that I wanted to keep. My sister stood up before the attorney had even finished speaking. She was already texting someone. Her husband, my brother-in-law, held her coat open for her. He had the look of a man who had learned long ago that his job in life was to make her exits smooth. You can keep whatever's inside, she said to me, not unkindly, the way you tell someone they can keep the last slice of pizza you no longer want. Most of it's just grandfather's old junk anyway. Rusty tools, broken furniture. I had someone look through it years ago. She paused at the door. Just make sure you're out before Monday. The crew doesn't like surprises. Then she was gone. The attorney offered me a glass of water. I told him I was fine. I was not fine. My name is Claire. I am 28 years old. I work as a senior estate liquidator, which means I spend my days walking through other people's inherited properties, cataloging what has value and what does not. I know how to read a room. I know how to look at a dusty sideboard and tell you whether it's a reproduction or a genuine piece worth $10,000. I know how to trace provenance, authenticate signatures, and identify the difference between sentiment and substance. I also know what it looks like when someone decides your inheritance is worthless without bothering to check. I drove out to the property that afternoon. It was 53 minutes outside the city, up a county road that turned from asphalt to gravel 2 miles before you reached the gate. My grandfather had bought the land in the 1960s. He'd run a small furniture restoration business out of the barn for 30 years before his eyesight went. After he died, my parents kept paying the property taxes without ever really deciding what to do with it. My father used to say he was going to fix it up someday. Someday never came. The barn was not what I expected. I had a memory of it from childhood, cavernous and dim, smelling of sawdust and linseed oil, my grandfather's hands always moving over some piece of wood. But I had not been here since I was 11 years old. That was 17 years ago. I expected collapse. I expected ruin. What I found instead was a building that was tired but not broken. The siding was weathered gray. One of the upper vent panels had come loose and was hanging at an angle. The foundation had some cracking along the south wall, visible from the outside, but nothing that suggested imminent structural failure. I walked the perimeter slowly, the way I do at every estate property I assess, making notes on my phone, checking corners, looking at grade and drainage. Whoever my sister had hired to evaluate this property had not walked the perimeter. They had looked at it from the road and made their call. I opened the main doors with the key from the attorney's envelope. The hinges were stiff, but they moved. Inside, late afternoon light filtered through the grime on the high windows, laying long yellow rectangles across the concrete floor. Dust moved in the air. There were workbenches along one wall, tools hanging on pegboards, most of them rusted but organized. My grandfather's handwriting was still on the labels. Chisels, gouges, card scrapers. My sister was right that there was old furniture. Pieces were stacked and covered with canvas tarps along the back wall. I pulled one corner back. Underneath was a roll-top desk that had seen better days, and a set of ladder-back chairs with split seats. Nothing remarkable, at least not at first glance. I walked the length of the barn. It was roughly 80 feet deep. I paced it, out of habit 60 steps from door to back wall. Then I went outside and paced the exterior. 78 steps. I stopped. I walked the exterior again, slowly this time, counting carefully. 78 steps. I went back inside. 60 steps again. I stood at the back wall and did the math. 60 steps inside versus 78 outside. At roughly 2.5 feet per step, that was a discrepancy of about 40 feet. Nearly half the building's depth was unaccounted for. I work in estate liquidation. I have seen hidden rooms before. A panic room built into a Brentwood mansion. A Prohibition-era cellar in an old Louisville townhouse. A gun safe hidden behind a false bookshelf in a Knoxville farmhouse. People hide things, especially people of my grandfather's generation, who came of age watching banks fail and governments change, and did not entirely trust either one. I looked at the back wall. It was brick, floor to ceiling, painted over many times. The topmost layer, a faded cream, that had yellowed to the color of old newspaper. There were 2 workbenches bolted against it and a large pegboard panel that covered nearly the entire center section. I started at the left edge and knocked along the brick with my knuckle. Solid, solid, solid. I moved along the wall behind the first workbench. Hollow, not hollow the way air sounds, hollow the way a room sounds. I pulled the workbench away from the wall. It was heavy, loaded with cans of finish and stain that had hardened solid decades ago, but I got it moved. Behind it, at floor level, there was a seam in the brick. Not a crack, a seam. Deliberate, mortared, but running in a perfect vertical line from floor to ceiling about 8 feet from the left corner. The pegboard in the center of the wall was mounted on a frame. I looked at the bottom edge of the frame. The floor beneath it was clean. Not dusty clean, actually clean, the way a floor looks when something sweeps across it regularly. The frame was a door. There was a latch on the right side, recessed into the wood, invisible unless you were looking for it. My grandfather had been a craftsman. Of course it was invisible. I pulled the latch. The frame swung outward smoothly, soundlessly, balanced so perfectly on its hinges that a child could have moved it with one finger. Cold air rolled over me. Conditioned, dry, deliberate cold. I raised my phone flashlight. The space beyond was not small. It was a full room, maybe 30 feet deep, and the full width of the barn. The walls were insulated and paneled in cedar. A dehumidifier the size of a small refrigerator hummed quietly in the far corner, its green power light blinking in the dark. Climate control. Running continuously, which explained the utility bills still being charged to the estate bills my sister had apparently been paying without question for years, assuming they were for the main building. But that was not what stopped me cold. My grandfather had been a furniture restorer. That was what everyone said. That was the story of his life, a working man, a craftsman, a person of modest means, who was good with his hands and left behind a modest estate. That was the story my mother told. That was the story my sister had built her entire assumption about this property on. What I was standing in front of was not modest. The room was lined with wooden shelving, floor to ceiling, custom built, precisely fitted. On those shelves, wrapped in archival tissue and sleeved in acid-free plastic, were paintings. Dozens of them. Large ones leaned against the walls in padded wooden frames. Smaller ones were stacked in felt-lined drawers built into a unit that ran the length of the right wall. In the center of the room, a long work table held 3 pieces wrapped so carefully in conservation materials that they looked like sleeping figures. I walked to the nearest shelf and picked up a small canvas in a gilded frame. American Impressionist. I could see that immediately, the loose brushwork, the quality of the light in the landscape. I turned it over. On the stretcher bar, in pencil, a name and a date. I set it down very carefully. My hands were not entirely steady. I moved through the room slowly, the way I move through every estate assessment, because this was what I was trained to do, and training is what keeps panic from becoming chaos. I looked at signatures. I examined canvas texture and craquelure. I checked provenance labels on frames, the ones my grandfather had clearly applied himself, handwritten in his particular block print style, with acquisition dates going back to the 1950s and 1960s. My grandfather had spent 40 years restoring other people's furniture. What no one had apparently known, or no one had bothered to ask, was what he had been doing with the money he made. He had not been saving it in a bank. He had been buying art. Regional American paintings, mostly, from small galleries and estate sales and private collections during a period when that work was considered unfashionable, undervalued, and easy to acquire for almost nothing. That period was over. Had been over for 20 years. The market for American Impressionist and Regionalist work had quietly become extraordinary. I spent 2 hours in that room. By the time I came out, the sun was going down and the air outside smelled like cut grass and diesel from a tractor working a field somewhere to the west. I sat on the bumper of my car and looked at my notes. I had identified 31 pieces with reasonable confidence. I had photographed every single one. I had transcribed every provenance label my grandfather had written. I called my colleague Diane. She was the senior specialist at a regional auction house, and the person I trusted most in the world when it came to American painting. She had 30 years in the business, and the particular gift of never being impressed by anything until she had reason to be. I told her what I had found. I described 6 of the pieces in detail. She was quiet for a long time after each one. Finally, she said, "Claire, I need you to tell me the dimensions of the largest canvas in that room." I looked at my notes. I told her. She exhaled slowly. "Is there a woman in a yellow dress? Standing in a field? Looking away from the viewer?" I looked at my photographs. "Yes." Another long silence. "That painting," Diane said, "has been listed as missing since 1987. It was last documented in a private collection in Memphis. There was an insurance claim. Everyone assumed it had been destroyed in a fire." She paused. "Claire, your grandfather bought that painting for probably $200 at an estate sale, sometime in the 1960s. It is currently worth, conservatively, in today's market, somewhere between $400,000 and $600,000. By itself. My stomach dropped in a way that had nothing to do with fear. The other pieces you've described, she continued. If they are what you're saying they are, and if the provenance documentation holds, we could be talking about a collection worth several $1,000,000 total. I would need to see everything in person to give you a real number. But Claire, she stopped. Who else knows about this room? No one, I said. My sister scheduled demolition for Monday morning. The silence that followed was so long I checked my phone to make sure the call had not dropped. I'll be there tomorrow morning, Diane said. Do not touch anything else tonight. Do not tell anyone. I sat on the bumper of my car until it was fully dark. The barn was a black shape against a sky going purple and then navy. Inside it, behind a door my sister had never found, my grandfather's 40 years of quiet, deliberate choices were sitting in carefully maintained cold air, wrapped in tissue, waiting. She had dismissed this place without walking through it. She had accepted someone else's assessment, paid for the utility bills without looking at what was running, and scheduled a demolition crew for a building she had never entered. That was the thing about my sister. She had always been like that. Not stupid. She was sharp, aggressive, effective at getting what she wanted. But she had a particular blind spot, which was anything she had already decided was beneath her. Once she had categorized something as unimportant, it stopped existing for her. She stopped seeing it. I thought about the last 10 years. Our parents aging, needing help with things, the medical appointments, the financial paperwork, the calls to insurance companies, the 47 conversations with Medicare that I handled because my sister was always busy, always in the middle of something, always just about to circle back. I thought about how every conversation about the estate had begun with the word we. We need to think about Mom's care. We should look at long-term options. We have to make sure Dad's assets are protected. But when it came to making decisions, we collapsed into she. She chose the estate attorney. She reviewed the accounts. She determined what was significant and what was not. And she had looked at 40 acres and an old barn and decided, without walking through the door, that there was nothing inside worth her time. Diane arrived the next morning at 7. I met her at the gate with coffee. She was 61 years old, wore paint-spattered field clothes even to auction previews, and carried a loop she'd had since graduate school on a cord around her neck. She looked at the barn from the driveway and said nothing. I led her inside. I led her to the back wall. I showed her the latch. When the door swung open and the cold air hit her, she made a sound I had never heard from her before. It was not excitement. It was something quieter and more serious than that. She stood in the doorway for a full 30 seconds before she stepped through. She spent 4 hours in that room. She did not rush. She examined each piece the way she examined all things methodically, without drama, giving every object the full weight of her attention. I sat on a stool near the door and watched her work. Occasionally she would describe what she was seeing under her breath, half to herself, the running internal monologue of a specialist who has been doing this longer than I have been alive. Around noon she came and sat next to me. She took off her loop and held it in both hands. 31 pieces, she said. I've got confident attributions on 22 of them. The other 9 need lab work for full authentication. But my preliminary read is that they're genuine. She turned the loop over. The woman in the yellow dress is absolutely the missing Holbrook. That alone will be a significant story, provenance recovery, the insurance history, the documentation trail your grandfather kept. Auction houses live for that kind of narrative. She looked at me. Conservative estimate. If we take the collection to a major regional sale with proper marketing and a 30-day preview period, she named a number. It had 7 digits. I had been holding myself very still for the last 4 hours. I kept holding myself still. My sister scheduled this building for demolition on Monday, I said. Diane looked at me steadily. Then we have a documentation problem to solve before Monday. Here is what my sister had done, and here is why it mattered legally. At the estate attorney's office, she had filed an addendum standard procedure for rural properties that cataloged the barn's contents for purposes of liability release. She had listed everything inside as agricultural equipment, hand tools, and miscellaneous personal effects of no assessed value. She had signed that addendum herself. Her attorney had filed it with the county. She had legally defined the contents of that barn as having no assessed value, which meant that when I, as the inheritor of the rural parcel and all structures and contents therein, filed my own inventory with the estate, listing the contents of the climate-controlled storage room with Diane's preliminary valuations attached, I was not contradicting her. I was supplementing. She had said the contents had no assessed value. I had had them assessed. It turned out she was wrong. My estate attorney, mine, not hers. I had called one Friday afternoon while Diane was still working in the back room, reviewed everything by phone that evening. She signed the liability release? He confirmed. Yes. Describing the contents as miscellaneous personal effects of no assessed value? Yes. And you have documentation of the actual contents, with a preliminary valuation from a recognized specialist? Yes. He was quiet for a moment. She's going to argue she didn't know about the hidden room. She didn't, I said. But that's not a legal argument. The deed transfers the parcel and all contents to me. The contents include what's in the hidden room. Her characterization of the contents as valueless doesn't change what they are. It just tells us she didn't look. No, he said. It tells us she didn't look. I called the demolition company myself on Saturday morning and told them the Monday job was cancelled. The site supervisor was annoyed but professional. I told him there had been a change in the estate disposition. He said he would charge a cancellation fee. I told him that was fine. My sister called me 20 minutes later. Someone at the demolition company had apparently notified her. "What are you doing?" she said. "Protecting my asset," I said. "Claire, that building is condemned. I had it." The condemnation report was based on exterior structural observations. There was no interior inspection. I kept my voice even, the way I keep my voice even when I am walking a difficult client through evaluation they don't want to hear. I've had the building properly assessed by a licensed structural engineer as of yesterday afternoon. This was true. I had called one Friday, and he had come out Saturday morning, confirmed that the foundation cracking was cosmetic, and the building was structurally sound with standard maintenance. The condemnation flag will be lifted by the end of the week. Silence. "There's nothing in there," my sister said. Her voice had shifted. Not to anger yet. To something more careful. "I had someone go through it years ago. They missed something," I said. "What could you possibly—" She stopped. I heard her husband say something in the background. "What did you find?" "I found grandfather's collection." Another silence. Longer this time. "What collection?" "He didn't have a collection. He was a furniture repairman. He was a furniture restorer," I said. And yes, he did. He had a climate-controlled storage room built into the back of the barn in the late 1960s. He's been maintaining it on the estate utility account for the last 11 years. "You've been paying the bill without knowing what it was running." I heard her breathing change. "How much?" she said. I told her what Diane had told me. The conservative number. The number that did not include the recovered Holbrook, or the auction narrative premium, or the additional pieces still awaiting lab authentication. The silence that followed was different from the others. It was the silence of a person recalculating. Watching a set of numbers they thought they understood rearrange themselves into something they did not recognize. "That's not possible," she finally said. "I have a preliminary specialist assessment on file. I can have Diane send you her credentials if you'd like to review them. You can't just— the estate is settled. That's my—" She stopped. "The rural parcel and all structures and contents transferred to me," I said. "That's in the estate documents. That's in the deed. You filed an addendum describing the contents as personal effects of no assessed value, which released you from any liability claims related to the contents, and which also confirmed your position that those contents belong to the parcel." I paused. "I'm not disputing your inheritance. I'm not asking for anything that was designated to you. I'm telling you that what was designated to me turns out to be worth significantly more than either of us knew." She said nothing for a long time. "I had no idea," she finally said. Her voice was different now, smaller. "If I had known, you would have taken it," I said quietly. "Not as an accusation. As a fact. We both knew it was true." She hung up. I stood in the barn's main room and listened to the dehumidifier humming behind the cedar wall. Outside, through the high, dirty windows, I could see the afternoon light turning gold over the fields. This was my grandfather's land. He had stood on it for 40 years, and built something here, quietly, without telling anyone. The way people of that generation sometimes kept the most important things to themselves. Not from secrecy, exactly. From a kind of modesty that believed value did not need to announce itself. He had bought paintings because he loved them. He had cared for them with the same precision he brought to everything he worked on. He had built a room for them in the back of his barn, and maintained it faithfully, and apparently never told a single person they were there. Or maybe he had told one person. I found the envelope 3 days later, taped to the back of the cedar panel beside the main door of the storage room. It was unsealed, and it was addressed in his block print handwriting to no one, just a single letter C. The note inside was short. My grandfather was not a man who used 10 words when 3 would do. It said, "Your grandmother picked the first one. I picked the rest because they reminded me of her. I always figured the right person would find them. Take care of them. They have been well cared for, and they deserve to stay that way." That was all. I sat on the floor of the climate-controlled room for a while, in the cold, with the dehumidifier humming and the green light blinking, holding a note that had been waiting for me for 11 years, inside a wall my sister never thought to open. The auction was held in October. 12 weeks later, Diane handled everything: the catalog, the marketing, the recovered collection story that got picked up by 2 regional arts publications, and drew significantly more interest than a standard estate sale would have. The missing Holbrook alone generated a feature story, complete with the insurance history, and the photograph of my grandfather at a gallery opening in 1963, standing next to a man no one had been able to identify until now. 22 pieces sold that day. The remaining 9, once their lab authentication came back clean, would go in a spring sale. The total from the October auction was just over $2 million. My sister's attorney contacted mine 2 weeks before the sale. There was a letter expressing her position that the hidden storage room constituted a discovery of unknown assets that should be subject to estate redistribution. My attorney replied with a 7-page response that included the deed language, the addendum she had signed, the estate settlement documents, and a polite but comprehensive explanation of why her position had no legal basis. We did not hear back. My brother-in-law called me once. He was not unkind. He said my sister was having a hard time. I told him I understood that. I told him I hoped she was okay. I meant it, or most of it. I had spent too many years cleaning up after the wreckage of other people's assumptions to spend much energy being angry at my sister for making one. She had looked at a door she'd never opened, and decided she knew what was behind it. A lot of people do that. Most of them never face consequences for it. My sister happened to be wrong about the wrong door. I bought a house in February. Not a large one, a 1940s craftsman bungalow in East Nashville that needed work. The kind of work I was not afraid of. I enrolled in a graduate program in art history, with a concentration in American painting. I kept 3 pieces from my grandfather's collection, one for each room I spent the most time in. The woman in the yellow dress went to auction, because the Holbrook family deserved to have her provenance restored, and the insurance settlement her sale helped resolve had been a legal tangle for 37 years. But before she went, I sat with her for a long time in the cedar room, with the dehumidifier humming. She stood in a field looking away from the viewer, towards something just outside the edge of the canvas. Whoever painted her believed she was about to turn around. You could feel it in the way she stood, not leaving, not arriving, but right at the moment before everything changed. My grandfather had kept her for 60 years. I understood why. The spring sale came in March. The remaining 9 pieces, fully authenticated, sold in 40 minutes. The total from both sales, combined, was just under $3 million. My sister had paid 11 years of utility bills to keep that collection alive without knowing it existed. She had scheduled a demolition crew for a building she had never entered. She had signed a document describing $3 million worth of American art as miscellaneous personal effects of no assessed value. And she had done all of it with complete confidence. The way she did everything, never once imagining that the thing she had dismissed might turn out to be the thing that mattered most. There is a particular kind of arrogance that does not look like arrogance from the inside. It looks like efficiency. It looks like decisiveness. It looks like knowing which things deserve your attention and which ones don't. My sister had been sorting the world that way her entire life, and most of the time it had worked well enough. She had good instincts about people and deals and social dynamics. She was not a foolish person. She was just a person who had learned to stop at the surface of things. My grandfather was not that kind of person. He was the kind of person who looked at an overlooked painting in a defunct estate sale for $200 and saw what it actually was. He was the kind of person who built a room in the back of his barn, with the same care he brought to every piece of furniture he ever touched, and maintained it for decades without telling anyone. Because the work itself was the point, he left it to me in the only way he knew how to, by putting it somewhere that required curiosity to find it. I think about that sometimes, when I'm driving the county road out to the property, which I still own, and which I have been quietly renovating since last spring. The barn is structurally sound. I had the siding replaced. I had the foundation cracks properly addressed. The cedar room is still there, still running, still humming, though it holds different things now, pieces I've acquired through my own work, my own eye, the slow accumulation of a life that has just barely started. My sister got the house, the accounts, the car, the portfolio. I got 40 acres and a door nobody opened. It turned out that was enough.